Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Probably hungover this morning. As mentioned, my name is Scott LANTZ, Senior Technical Project Manager over at PopCap Games. These days, I work on our Platform Services division, which helps build centralized technology solutions for our products. Stuff like metrics and email and centralized data storage, identity service, these sorts of things. Before that, I was part of the founding team for Bejeweled Blitz. Today we're here to talk about the battle between building fast and building to last. And I want to talk about this because historically I come to a lot of these sessions and I'll hear folks make assertions that the only way to build your product is to get something out there fast. Get something out there that you didn't spend a lot of time on, see how customers react, and then invest behind it. On the flip side, I also hear people that are extremely adamant the only way to build your product is to invest heavily in it, have a full-time operations team behind the scenes when your product launches, ready to make content evolutions, continue to do analysis, and tune that product. And if you don't do that, you have no reason shipping your product. Both of these sides came from very successful people in the industry, and I was having a hard time reconciling that. I mean, clearly they're both true from their perspectives, but let's explore that. So first, let's start looking at building fast. The important thing to keep in mind during this entire thing is that players ultimately don't know or care what's under the hood. They want a fun game to play. If they're going to monetize, they're going to want compelling value propositions, but they don't care how much time you spent building a localization pipeline. They don't care how many staff are on hand to do operations for your product on an ongoing basis. They want to come to your product, they want to be engaged, they want to have fun, and hopefully they're compelled to come back. Another thing to keep in mind during this conversation is that when we talk about building fast, we're really talking about a set of different adjectives. But ultimately, that's meant to describe the notion of building your product with the minimal amount of functionality to responsibly put it out there in front of customers, see if it's going to work out, and if so, double down your investment. That's the building fast strategy. Risky experiments should be cheap. A lot of build fast products are products that cover new game design territory. And if that's the case, you don't want to bet your entire company's fortune on a single example or a single product, because if you do, obviously, that risky game design, if it doesn't work out, your company's left in a hard spot. So when you're entering a new genre or a new platform, or perhaps even trying to try out some new game mechanics for a new franchise, those are the sorts of things that may or may not work. And those are the times when you may not want to invest in the heaviest back-end infrastructure behind your product that you can, because if it's a failure, all of that will have been for naught. And of course, as you're making cheaper bets, that in turn means that you can make more bets. And the more chips that you're able to put on the table, and the more squares on the roulette table, that's going to increase the probability that you're ultimately going to win the jackpot. And so, if you can build one product that you think might succeed and you invest in that heavy infrastructure, maybe that same amount of revenue and manpower and attention could have been spent on 3 different products. And those 3 different products might have taught you lessons along the way, and one of them might have caught traction, might have just been a little kitschy in the right way to catch customers' attention. And ultimately, experimentation and failure are a great way to learn. I think this is something that everybody sees products that fail simply as a failure. But I think if you were to go to ask Rovio, for example, how many products they had shipped to the market at varying levels of success before they had their Angry Birds hit, I think that you might get an answer that's pretty illuminating. That they learned lessons along the way, and those informed their bigger hits. And at I think most companies, you're going to find that there are some products that ship that didn't work out, and those things that didn't work out are in turn going to inform what not to do in the future, or in some cases what to do about the future, what parts of that product were a success even if the whole wasn't. So the flip side of building to fast, one of the major ones is that operating a service without tools and infrastructure is very, very difficult. And of course this is not really true for standalone like iOS products that don't have a back-end infrastructure. But if your product is sort of a connected product in any meaningful fashion, then your product is going to have a hard time surviving and evolving and maintaining the interest of folks, and your business is going to have a hard time capitalizing on the success of that product. I'll get into this in a bit more detail later on, but as part of the Bejeweled Blitz team when it shipped, And we originally didn't have, for example, a localization pipeline built into the code base. We originally did not have any monetization other than sending people over to PopCap.com. The product caught us off guard. It was a build fast product. And we were caught off guard by its success, but we weren't well positioned to capitalize on its success, in part because we didn't have the operational infrastructure behind it. We didn't, in order to even tune a simple configuration parameter of the game, we had to do an entire code deployment, and that turned out to be a very costly thing. Evolving your product under the watchful eyes of players and as they're actively playing can be costly and slow. And the reason why is, if you ship your product in sort of a build fast mentality in the first place, you are purposely shaving off a lot of the operational tools that's going to make maintaining your product over its life easier. Sure, you can go back and write those things if your product turns out to be a success, and that's a viable strategy. But what you're going to find is, at the same time that you're needing to address the needs of your business, as you're needing to add in new customer support tool sets, as you're needing to add in new economical tuning engines, monetization, configuration options. At the same time, your customers are going to be expecting content updates and feature improvements and game design evolution. And if you went from being a team that couldn't even afford to do one side of that in the first place to suddenly have to do all of that at the same time with all the code collisions it's going to imply, that level of growth is often realistic. And so as you add in those necessary business-related components after release, that's a lot of times going to come at the expense of keeping the player's attention by not giving them the same evolution of product that they would like to see. And then lastly, and this probably goes without saying, but it's extraordinarily difficult to compete against entrenched genre leaders when you are in the build fast mentality. You're not going to compete against Farmville or dethrone Farmville with a product built by 3 guys in the course of a month. So really, if you're going to build fast, you need to be exploring new game design territory. And that's really where that makes sense anyway, because there's that whole experimentational component. You have to be prepared to fail with a build fast product. So, of course, building to last is the necessary choice when competition is fierce. If you do have a product in a genre, on a platform that's well established, it's turned from blue ocean to red ocean, meaning that any attempt to get new users has to come at the expense of another product, and that means that your product has to be superior and hold their attention over that competition. That's when you're going to have to start building things to last. You're going to have all these content pipelines in place. You're going to have all these tuning tools in place. You're going to have your good support infrastructure, your localization engines, all of that. Building last is a good choice for safe bets and long-term investments. You can bet that when PopCap gets around to releasing Bejeweled 4, whenever that may be, that we're going to set a team on there we're going to spend all the time it takes to make that meet the expectations of our customers for a world-class product like that and a world-class franchise. We know that people like that gameplay. We know that people like that product, and we know that it has to be absolutely state-of-the-art and highly competitive in order to hold people's attentions. And then lastly, I want to talk about building to last is the right choice for technology with multiple uses. So far, we've talked about products, we've talked about games, but there's more than that. A lot of people in this room, and I'm definitely on that list, spend their time these days working on technology behind the scenes. It may not even be at a specific product. I'm building metric solutions that's used across all of our games. I'm building email solutions that's used across all of our games. Those things typically can't be built particularly fast. You've got to spend the time to develop the infrastructure to make sure that as games build on top of them, those are very, very, very solid. And those can be upkept, and that they're low risk in terms of deployment and maintenance. Ultimately, so that the game teams then can move fast. They can try out new experimental game designs. They're not reinventing the wheel every time, and they're not bogged down by all of these operational components that those operational components are provided for them. So as we look at the question, do we build fast or do we build to last? The answer, of course, is It's the entire spectrum, really. And it's a case-by-case basis, not just on a product-by-product or basis, but it can also be feature-by-feature. It can be that maybe the gameplay of your product and the front end and the graphics are something that you actually spend a lot of time building something that's going to last. And maybe that you build in a localization infrastructure because you think that your product can be big overseas, but you know what, you're just going to skimp a little bit on the customer service component or some other components at the beginning until you see if it's a success. So now that we sort of looked at both sides, I want to talk through a few case studies at PopCap and how we made that decision over time and frankly how that went. Bejeweled Blitz is the example I'm personally most familiar with. Bejeweled Blitz was conceived in about October of '08. We had a team of roughly 5 people, it was a little different at different times, that worked on it for about 8 weeks. And it was a very fast-moving product. It was an entrepreneurial, nimble team. The company didn't have a lot of expectations. I mean, even though it was a Bejeweled franchise product, and now, historically, it's turned out to be very successful and to have lived a very long life, at the time, it was considered an experiment. Facebook was really in its relative infancy compared to where it's at now. I would describe that environment as much more blue ocean, meaning, you know, there were a lot of users out there to get, and it didn't have to come at the expense of other products. You know, we looked at Bejeweled 2 was our Bejeweled 2 and Bejeweled Twist were our 2 products that were live at the time. And we took the Bejeweled 2 SWIFT, just the Flash component that was on the website. And that was meant to ultimately to sell copies of Bejeweled from PopCap.com. We took that and we hacked that up a bit, added in some JavaScript hooks, added in a 5-minute time component so that each game was 5 minutes rather than the 20 or 60 minutes that a single game of Bejeweled could last on a good player. And we sort of played around with it internally and we found out people liked it. Then somebody, as a joke, compiled a build that only lasted for 6 seconds. And what we found was that was surprisingly fun. You would think in 6 seconds that you can't get a meaningful score differentiation or you can't really have a lot of fun, but actually we found that people were hyper-focused on those 6 seconds as soon as the voice said, go, that people were making matches as quickly as they could, and that in fact people were proud of the scores they were producing, and that helped inform us to get down to the 1-minute time frame that we ended up shipping with. It was built very, very fast. PopCap at the time didn't have any real experience in the social games market because the social games market was very, very young. Our operations team at that point, our server operations team, had run PopCap.com, but there's a huge, huge difference between running a .com web portal for people to try out versions of the games and ultimately buy them. Those are kind of low traffic and extraordinarily high value users because if they bought, they were often paying us $20 or more in a transaction. The flip side of that is as we moved into the social realm, now we're dealing with millions of hits a day, each of which is low value. We're rarely getting monetization from any of the users. And the explosion in the popularity of this product when we put it out, we were not braced for. We didn't have a localization infrastructure under the hood. We didn't have a customer support infrastructure. Any change to any parameter of the game required an entire code push, which involved a whole team for an afternoon, including most of the developers to be on deck. And it took years for us to slowly work in the right infrastructural components in the game because we had to continue evolving for customers in real time. And that meant there was a lot of pain and a huge amount of missed opportunity to our business. And that's interesting, and I think that's where this whole conversation boils down of do you build fast or build to last? The argument can be made that if we had built to last in the first place, that when we hit market, we would have probably had much better monetization. We didn't have any monetization built into Bejeweled Blitz for the first 9 months of the product's life. Instead, we would just send people over to PopCap.com. Hey, if you like this game, by the way, there's a $10 or $20 downloadable over at PopCap.com. Why don't you go play that? And that actually was remarkably successful. We could track a lot of downloads as being directly attributable from people playing the game. But we weren't making direct monetization through micropayments. That came about 9 months later, and that has proved a very valuable business model for us, but even that started off slow, and you know, there were 9 months of dead air from microtransactions. Another interesting example of build fast, and most people don't know that PopCap has this, but PopCap has an indie label, and we call that Fourth and Battery, and this has been described by our Ed Allard, our head of studio, as a sort of creative release valve for the studio. And we have a number of game design initiatives at PopCap. We had a 24-hour game jam at one point. We have every 4 months or so, we spend a week throwing studio resources, something called PopCamp, which is something where they get to experiment with whatever designs that they may want to experiment with. Most of them never end up seeing the light of day, but some of them are interesting, and some of them actually do get turned into full-fledged products. Fourth and Battery is an attempt for PopCap to put products in front of users. All of them so far have been completely free with no monetization options. One of them has been a result of a game produced in a 24-hour game jam being polished up by the same developers over about a week or two, and then eventually released on the App Store. Another one was a coordination with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, where there was a sick young guy who had a game design idea, and his wish was to help make that happen. He worked with some of our developers and produced a game called Allied Star Patrol. That was a great game. It was actually a lot of fun and a really, really heartwarming story. And the third game is a game called Candy Train, which is an old Flash game favorite from the PopCap website. I don't think it was ever sold. I think it was only a Flash game back in the day, back when we were sort of a Flash game portal many moons ago. And it was an employee favorite. And so a few of the employees that were looking to move into new positions at the company took it upon themselves to make an extremely highly polished version of that for iOS on their own time. And the result was so great that we put it out under Fourth and Battery. So these experiments, and they are experiments, are great because the expectations are very low. The costs are very low. We're moving very, very fast. But you never know when one of these is going to teach us a lesson that can then inform our products, or you never know when one of them is going to catch traction with the audience's attention and maybe provide a seed for a more highly profitable and well-developed follow-up game. Bejeweled 3, this is the current incarnation of Bejeweled. What's interesting is that the Bejeweled 3 gameplay and production values and feature set on iOS is just known as Bejeweled, sort of resetting the brand name over there. But they're the same game. And this is, of course, a flagship title. Now, this is kind of cheating a little bit because the world we live in today is where every game is connected and has a back-end server component for the most part. Bejeweled 3 was one of our last games that was developed before that era. It was developed with PC as the lead platform, but of course, we spent a huge amount of time on that product. So long, in fact, that the development team actually stopped production in the middle and went over and helped us evolve Bejeweled Blitz from being based on the Bejeweled 2 Swift into actually Bejeweled 3 gameplay before Bejeweled 3 was even released. So I mentioned about 9 months in that we added monetization. Well, that was part of a from-scratch rewrite based on the Bejeweled 3 rule set. And that included the real-time matching. You know, it used to be that Bejeweled and all of its clones back in the day, when you make a match, you had to wait for all of the cascades to resolve before you could make another match. Nobody really knew how limiting that was. It just felt natural and sensible. But then the developers figured out how to just let you continually make matches, and it just felt so much better. And you know, rather than waiting for Bejeweled 3 to come out, we decided to port that back into Bejeweled Blitz. Bejeweled Blitz. And then lastly, our platform services division at PopCap, this is another great example where we have a team of people working to make absolute build-to-last components. And you know, we can't launch, say, a metrics infrastructure underneath a game, a dependency that all of our games have, if it's going to fall over, cause negative repercussions of those games. Any failure is not going to be a failure on the part of one product. It's going to be multiplied by all those products. So the type of software development cycle, the methodologies that we use, and the bar of scrutiny is, of course, much, much higher. And if I can leave you guys with just a few thoughts to consider on your own, one is try to look through the user's eyes for your products. Don't make assumptions that you have to have all of these components. Understand that the success of your product is ultimately going to be determined by how well customers respond to your product, and so make sure that you're looking through their eyes, seeing what they're seeing. Have that sense of entertainment and excitement and wonderment that's going to keep them coming back. Think about the operational components of your game at the same time. If there's something that's absolutely critical to your business, if, say, localizing your product from the very beginning is going to amplify your business by 10x, that could be enough for that one component to turn a small product, a mildly successful product into something that actually is highly profitable. Focus on the minimum viable product. And this is absolutely essential whether you're building fast or building to last. Think about what must be part of the core product. Anything that you can defer responsibly without a huge amount of cost, you should do. Don't be afraid to buck convention and trust yourself. You know your product, you know your market, you know your franchises, and you know your business. Nobody else does. So as other people get on the stage and tell you what you have to do, I would argue that the answers can be anywhere along that spectrum, and you know the best. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, so can we get the lights up? And I think we have time for 2 questions, so make them good ones, and we'll have this microphone, so just wait for the microphone and we'll hear your question. Anyone?
Hi.
Hey.
Great talk. I enjoyed the honest compromise between the two. What I'm kind of curious about is we do something similar in terms of prototyping and building an environment where we can kind of build new games and hackathons and things like that. And so I'm really excited to see what you've done with Fourth and Battery. What I'm curious about is what do you think are the pros and cons of that process, and what do you think is the next evolution that your studio is going to take on it? Like, obviously, you've built some things, you've shipped a few things. What are the next steps?
You know, that's a good question, and as I understand it, they are actually looking at, well, what do we do with this? Is there a way to evolve it to take better advantage? And, you know, that's an ongoing conversation. I'm not particularly privy to it. I do know that the initiative is considered to have been a success for what it was. You know, that was kicked off back before we were bought by EA, and of course, being bought by EA, there's pressure to deliver only bigger products and not so much the smaller products. At the same time, I know that within PopCap, there's a feeling that that sort of initiative was critical to fostering our creativity, and that's the sort of thing that breeds new intellectual property. I think that you will see more Fourth and Battery products from PopCap. Can't comment on any sort of time frame. I think that you may also see more experiments. Maybe we actually find a way to build in the operation or technological experiments under the hood. It won't be obvious to the player per se, but maybe we can build fast on some technology initiatives to pilot them and see how they hold up and what value they might provide to inform whether or not we build those into a long-term infrastructure. I think you may also find some experimental monetization options, stuff that, you know, they're low stakes. If it fails, we don't have any forecasting against those titles. Anything we make might be gravy. I also think there's a real morale benefit to doing that. You know, I think it's considered to be a little bit almost of a reward for having worked so well on a product, you know, a core franchise title that might not be what you choose to work on, but after you spent a year, 2 years, 3 years on, say, the Bejeweled franchise, to be able to go and work with a small team of something that's a game design you had, put out in front of users, point to that and feel real ownership over it, I think that's another value. And hopefully that will continue in whatever we do in the future.
I totally agree. We are actually building something similar before we got acquired by Zynga, so it was really exciting to see you guys create Fourth and Battery and start shipping games like that.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right, we just have enough time for one more quick, good question. Anyone? Or we can also... Oh, we have one here. All the way to the other side of the room. Go, go, go.
Do you feel like the social climate has shifted since you released Bejeweled Blitz, and like now there's a little more demand for polish from the users like immediately, or do you think that you can still get something out fast and end up being successful through iteration?
I think the social games market absolutely has shifted. If we were to release something like Bejeweled Blitz now, I don't think we could build it fast. The titles that we've released since then, Zuma Blitz, Solitaire Blitz, and Lucky Gem Casino, have all spent more time based on them, based in development, getting you know, the lessons learned. You know, I think it's interesting to note that none of those have reached the success that Bejeweled did, and it's one thing to say that, well, the market's tougher now. At the same time, Bejeweled Blitz launched without a lot of that infrastructure behind the product. So, I mean, was it the strength of the franchise, or was it honestly the agility and the freshness of the product? It's hard to say. Unfortunately, I think as we all look towards the Facebook top-end games list, what we'll see is there's not a whole lot of games that aren't more in the build-to-last mentality. But I think that there continue to be fresh platforms and networks and platforms everywhere. And as we look towards those, and honestly, as we have an experimental game design that we want to try out even on established platforms, I think there's still potential. Of course, the faster you build, and that kind of means the cheaper you build, the easier it is to turn a profit. And, you know, you can look at examples like Spry Fox and some of their titles. You can look at Kixeye. Those are relatively smaller companies, and they've figured out how to make faster products that are not as bulky as, say, a full-fledged Zynga title, and they turn profitability, and they are successful by their own right. So I think there's still some possibility, but it is definitely a different market, especially to get in the top, say, 10.